The Tavern Showdown. The town of Dry Creek was a quiet place, a speck on the map of the sprawling Old West. Life moved slow, like the trickle of water in the creek that gave the town its name. At the heart of this sleepy settlement stood the Silver Spur Saloon, a weathered but charming tavern known for its good whiskey, warm hearth, and an unassuming bartender, Caleb Thornton. Caleb was a man of few words. With a neatly trimmed beard and sharp green eyes that seemed to see right through people, he moved through his saloon with quiet efficiency. He wasn't big or burly like some barkeeps, but his steady hands and calm demeanor kept the rowdier patrons in line. No one in town really knew much about Caleb's past, and he wasn't one to share. He simply appeared one day 5 years back, bought the saloon from its retiring owner, and made it his own. This particular evening, the Silver Spur was lively. The piano played a cheerful tune, townsfolk chatted over drinks, and the scent of roasted chicken wafted from the kitchen. Caleb stood behind the bar, polishing glasses and nodding politely at his regulars. Then, like a storm rolling in without warning, the peace shattered. A gang of 6 bikers roared into town on their rumbling iron horses, their engines echoing off the wooden storefronts. They parked their bikes haphazardly in front of the saloon, swaggering through the double doors like they owned the place. The leader, a burly man with a thick black beard and leather vest studded with spikes, scanned the room with a sneer. His name, as everyone would soon learn, was Jack Iron Fist Reardon. Well, Jack drawled, his voice as rough as gravel. "Ain't this a cozy little hole in the wall?" The saloon fell silent. Caleb looked up from the glass he was polishing but said nothing, his face impassive. The townsfolk exchanged uneasy glances. It was clear these men were trouble. "Whiskey," Jack barked, slamming a hand on the bar. "Top shelf. And don't take all day." Caleb moved with deliberate calm, pouring a glass of whiskey and sliding it across the bar. Jack caught it, sniffed it like a man appraising a bad deal, and threw it back in one gulp. "Not bad," he said, setting the glass down with a loud clink. "But you're awful quiet, barkeep. Don't you know it's polite to welcome your guests?" Caleb gave a faint smile. "Welcome to the Silver Spur. Let me know if there's anything else you need." Jack laughed, a harsh, grating sound that made everyone flinch. "Anything else? How about some entertainment? This place is dead. Ain't that right, boys?" The rest of the gang jeered, their laughter echoing through the saloon as they shoved tables and chairs aside. One of them, a wiry man with a scar running down his cheek, grabbed a deck of cards and started flicking them across the room like makeshift darts. "Hey," a patron protested as a card narrowly missed his head. "Relax, old man," the scarred biker sneered. "We're just having a little fun." Caleb stepped forward, his voice steady but firm. "Gentlemen, I'd appreciate it if you didn't disturb the other patrons." Jack leaned across the bar, his face inches from Caleb's. "Or what? You gonna throw us out?" The tension in the room thickened. Caleb held Jack's gaze, his green eyes unflinching. "I'd prefer not to cause a scene. But I will if I have to." Jack grinned, baring yellowed teeth. "You hear that, boys? The barkeep thinks he's a tough guy." The gang roared with laughter, and one of them, a burly man with tattoos snaking up his arms, grabbed a bottle from the shelf and smashed it on the floor. Caleb's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. "Oops," the tattooed man said with mock innocence. "Guess I'll need another drink." The laughter was cut short by the sudden sound of a chair scraping against the floor. An elderly patron stood, his face pale but determined. "You fellas have had your fun. Now leave this town in peace." Jack turned slowly, his grin fading. "And who's gonna make us, old-timer?" "You?" The biker took a menacing step forward, but before he could get any closer, Caleb's voice cut through the tension like a whip. "That's enough." All eyes turned to the bar, where Caleb stood with one hand resting casually on the counter. The other, unnoticed until now, hovered near his waist. Beneath the bar, hidden from sight, his fingers grazed the worn leather of a holster strapped to his hip. Jack noticed the movement and smirked. What's this? You hiding a little pop gun under there, barkeep? Caleb didn't respond. His gaze was steady, his posture relaxed, but coiled like a spring. For the first time, a flicker of unease crossed Jack's face. Let's go, boys, Jack said after a long pause, his bravado cracking just slightly. This place is boring anyway. The gang grumbled but followed their leader out the door, their heavy boots thudding against the wooden floor. The roar of their bikes filled the air once more as they sped off into the night. As the saloon slowly returned to life, the townsfolk looked at Caleb with a mixture of gratitude and curiosity. The bartender said nothing, simply returning to his work as if nothing had happened. But as he placed a freshly polished glass on the shelf, his hand lingered near the holster one last time. Whatever past he had tried to leave behind, it seemed, was not so easily forgotten. The mysterious bartender. The Silver Spur Saloon was quieter the next morning, as the townsfolk whispered among themselves about the rowdy bikers and Caleb's calm but firm response. To most of the patrons, Caleb Thornton was an enigma. He had a quiet strength that didn't come from size or bluster but from something deeper, something that hinted at a life far removed from pouring drinks in a sleepy town. Caleb's backstory. As Caleb stood behind the bar, polishing glasses in his usual routine, his mind wandered to a time he'd tried hard to forget. The memories came unbidden, like ghosts rattling chains in the recesses of his mind. Years ago, Caleb Thornton wasn't a bartender in a quiet town. He was known as the Deadeye, a legendary sharpshooter whose skills were whispered about across the Old West. His uncanny ability to outdraw anyone in a duel and his reputation for unerring accuracy had made him both feared and sought after. In those days, Caleb had been a bounty hunter, chasing down outlaws with a mixture of precision and pragmatism. But the violence took its toll. Every bullet fired, every life taken, chipped away at his soul. He longed for peace, for a life untainted by bloodshed. One fateful day, after a particularly brutal encounter with a gang of outlaws, Caleb holstered his pistol and walked away from the life that had defined him. Dry Creek became his refuge, a place where no one knew his name or his past. He bought the Silver Spur, hoping to leave behind the violence and the name Deadeye that had once followed him like a shadow. But even in this quiet town, the past had a way of catching up. The bikers crossed the line. The calm didn't last long. That evening, as the Silver Spur filled with patrons once again, the roar of engines shattered the peace. The bikers were back, swaggering into the saloon with even more bravado than the night before. "Hey, barkeep!" Jack Iron Fist Reardon called out as he strode to the bar. "Miss me?" Caleb didn't look up. "What can I get you?" Jack grinned, slamming his hand on the counter. "Oh, we'll get to that. First, me and the boys want a little service from your pretty waitress over there." Caleb's eyes flicked to the corner of the room, where young Mary Beth, the saloon's waitress, was carrying a tray of drinks. She froze under the biker's leering stares. "Leave her alone," Caleb said, his voice low but firm. Jack chuckled, leaning closer. "Ah, come on, barkeep. We're just having a little fun." He turned to his gang. "Ain't that right, boys?" The bikers hooped and hollered, their laughter ringing through the saloon. Mary Beth looked to Caleb, her face pale, her tray trembling in her hands. "You've had your fun," Caleb said, stepping out from behind the bar. "It's time to sit down and enjoy your drinks like everyone else." The saloon went silent. All eyes were on Caleb as he stood in the center of the room, his calm demeanor unshaken. Jack's grin faded, replaced by a sneer. "You got a death wish, barkeep?" he growled. Caleb didn't flinch. "Just trying to keep the peace." Jack took a step closer, his massive frame looming over Caleb. "You think you can tell me what to do? You're just a washed-up bartender." Foreshadowing. Caleb's movements were subtle but deliberate. He shifted his weight slightly, his right hand brushing the edge of his apron. Those who were paying attention noticed the fluidity in his stance, the way he carried himself like a man accustomed to danger. One of the bikers, a wiry man with a patch over one eye, noticed too. Something about this guy ain't right, Jack, he muttered. Jack ignored him, laughing as he turned back to Caleb. What's it gonna be, barkeep? You gonna throw me out? Caleb's gaze didn't waver. I'd rather not. But if I have to, I will. A clue to the past. Before Jack could respond, an older patron at the bar spoke up. His voice trembled, but his words were steady. You boys don't know who you're dealing with. Jack turned, his brow furrowed. What's that, old man? The patron, a grizzled rancher named Hank, took a sip of his drink before setting it down with a shaky hand. You ever hear of the Deadeye? The bikers exchanged confused glances, but Jack barked a laugh. Deadeye? Sounds like some old cowboy story. Hank shook his head. Ain't no story. I saw him once, years ago. Took down 3 outlaws in a blink, like it was nothing. Fastest draw I've ever seen. He turned his gaze to Caleb, his eyes narrowing. And if I'm not mistaken, that's him standing right there. The room fell deathly quiet. All eyes were on Caleb, who said nothing, his expression unreadable. Jack smirked, clearly unimpressed. You expect me to believe this guy's some kind of gunslinger? Hank shrugged. Believe what you want. But if you're smart, you'll leave him be. For a moment, Jack seemed to consider the warning. Then he laughed, shaking his head. You're all scared of this quiet little barkeep? Pathetic. He turned back to Caleb, jabbing a finger in his chest. You think you're gonna scare me with old cowboy tales? Caleb's voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. I don't want any trouble. Jack grinned, leaning in close. Oh, you've got trouble, barkeep. Lots of it. As the gang erupted into laughter, Caleb's hand drifted toward the edge of the bar. The townsfolk held their breath, wondering if the stories were true, and if they were about to see the Deadeye in action once again. The trigger moment. The silver spur was thick with tension, like a storm about to break. Caleb Thornton stood calmly behind the bar, his steady green eyes fixed on Jack Iron Fist Reardon and his gang of bikers. The air was heavy with the unspoken threat that hung between the barkeep and the unruly gang, but Caleb's calm demeanor hadn't wavered, not yet. The bikers' ultimatum. Jack slammed his fist on the bar, rattling the glasses and drawing startled gasps from the other patrons. All right, barkeep, he growled. Here's how this is gonna go. You're gonna give us some real entertainment, or we're gonna tear this place apart. Starting with you. Caleb remained motionless, his hands resting lightly on the bar. You've had your drinks. You're not welcome here anymore. It's time to leave. The gang erupted in laughter, their mocking jeers filling the saloon. Jack leaned in closer, his face inches from Caleb's. You think you're in charge here? You're just a washed-up barkeep. So unless you've got a piano-playing monkey hidden somewhere, you better start dancing. One of the gang members, a wiry man with a snake tattoo curling around his neck, picked up a chair and smashed it against the wall. Splinters flew across the room, and the other patrons cowered in their seats. Caleb's jaw tightened, but he didn't move. Caleb's breaking point. The tension reached its peak when one of the bikers, the scarred man with the patch over his eye, grabbed Mary Beth, the young waitress, by the arm. She struggled against his grip, her tray of drinks crashing to the floor. Let me go, she cried, her voice trembling. Relax, sweetheart, the biker sneered. We're just gonna have a little fun. That was it. Caleb's breaking point. Let her go, he said, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. The scarred biker laughed, tightening his grip on Mary Beth's arm. Or what, old man? In one smooth motion, Caleb stepped out from behind the bar, his right hand dipping to his waist. For the first time, the townsfolk saw the leather holster strapped to his hip, and the gleaming revolver nestled within it. Before anyone could react, Caleb's hand moved in a blur. Skill on display. The room froze as Caleb drew his revolver, the motion so fast it seemed almost impossible. In the same heartbeat, a deafening crack echoed through the saloon. The scarred biker released Mary Beth with a howl of pain, clutching his wrist. His knife clattered to the floor, the blade nicked cleanly in two by Caleb's bullet. The gang stared in stunned silence as Caleb stood there, revolver still in hand, its barrel pointed downward. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with a quiet fury. Jack recovered first, snarling as he reached for the pistol holstered at his side. "You're gonna regret that, barkeep." But Caleb was faster. Another shot rang out, and Jack's pistol flew from his hand, landing harmlessly on the floor. Caleb hadn't even shifted his stance. The other bikers scrambled to draw their weapons, but Caleb's voice stopped them cold. "Don't," he said, his tone as steady as the revolver in his hand. "The next one won't miss." The gang froze, their hands hovering over their holsters. They could see it now, this wasn't just some bartender with a rusty old gun. This was a man who could take them all down before they even blinked. Shock and awe. Jack glared at Caleb, his jaw clenched, but he didn't reach for his gun again. He could see the truth in the barkeep's eyes. Caleb wasn't bluffing. "You think this is over?" Jack spat, cradling his injured hand. "No," Caleb said, his voice calm but firm. "It's over when you leave this town and don't come back." The gang hesitated, their bravado crumbling under the weight of Caleb's presence. One by one, they backed away, their hands raised in surrender. As they shuffled toward the door, Caleb lowered his revolver but kept it in hand. "If I see you around here again, I won't be so forgiving." Jack muttered a curse under his breath, but said nothing more. The gang stumbled out of the saloon, their confidence shattered. Aftermath. The saloon was silent as the patrons processed what had just happened. Caleb holstered his revolver and turned to Mary Beth, who was still trembling. "You all right?" he asked gently. She nodded, her eyes wide. "Why, yes. Thank you, Caleb." He gave her a reassuring nod and returned to the bar, picking up the broken glass with deliberate calm. Hank, the old rancher who had recognized Caleb earlier, broke the silence. "Well, I'll be damned. It really is you, Deadeye." Caleb didn't respond, but the look in his eyes said enough. The legend was true, and the quiet barkeep of Dry Creek was far more than he appeared to be. From that day on, the townsfolk looked at Caleb with a mixture of awe and respect. But Caleb himself? He simply went back to polishing glasses, hoping the peace he sought wouldn't be shattered again. The Reckoning. The Silver Spur Saloon was abuzz with whispers the next morning. Caleb Thornton, the quiet bartender who had kept to himself for years, had revealed a past none of the townsfolk could have guessed. The bikers' retreat the night before was the talk of the town, but the peace didn't last long. Jack Iron Fist Reardon wasn't the type to let humiliation go unanswered. The duel. By mid-afternoon, the gang roared back into Dry Creek, their engines shattering the calm. This time, they didn't head straight for the saloon. Instead, Jack dismounted in the middle of the dusty main street and shouted, his voice echoing off the wooden buildings. "Caleb Thornton! You think last night was the end of this? Come out here and face me like a real man." The townsfolk peeked out from windows and doorways, their curiosity mixed with fear. Slowly, Caleb stepped out of the saloon, his expression as calm as ever. His boots crunched on the dirt as he walked toward Jack, who stood with his arms crossed, his gang lined up behind him. "You want something, Jack?" Caleb asked, his voice steady. Jack sneered. "Yeah. A fair fight. You embarrassed me in front of my men, and I'm not leaving until we settle this. Just you and me. No one else." Caleb looked him over, his green eyes sharp. "You sure about that? You don't seem like the type who can handle losing twice." The townsfolk gasped at Caleb's calm defiance, and Jack's face twisted in anger. "Enough talk. You and me. Right here. Right now." Caleb sighed. He didn't want this. He never wanted to use his gun again, but Jack's pride wasn't going to let things go peacefully. "Fine," Caleb said, his voice heavy with resignation. "But when it's over, you and your gang leave this town for good." Jack grinned. You got it, barkeep. Town support. As the two men prepared for the duel, the townsfolk gathered cautiously on the edges of the street. Murmurs filled the air as people shared stories they'd heard or remembered about Caleb's past. That's Deadeye Thornton, Hank said, his voice filled with admiration. Fastest draw I've ever seen. They're lucky he didn't finish them last night. He's a good man, Mary Beth added, her voice firm. He saved me when no one else could. Word spread quickly, and the crowd began to rally behind Caleb. People who had only known him as a quiet, unassuming bartender now saw him as a protector, someone willing to stand up for the town. The showdown. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows across the street as Caleb and Jack faced each other. The air was thick with tension, every eye in Dry Creek fixed on the two men. Jack's hand hovered near his holster, his eyes locked on Caleb. You ready, barkeep? Caleb didn't respond. He simply stood there, his posture relaxed, his right hand resting loosely at his side. A bead of sweat trickled down Jack's temple as he waited for the signal. Finally, a single voice rang out from the crowd. Drawl. Jack moved first, his hand darting to his holster. But Caleb was faster. Before Jack could even grip his pistol, Caleb's revolver was in his hand, the barrel leveled with perfect precision. A single shot rang out. Jack froze, his eyes wide with shock. His gun flew from his hand, landing harmlessly in the dirt several feet away. He looked down to see a clean bullet hole through the brim of his hat, which had been knocked from his head. The street was silent as Caleb lowered his revolver, spinning it once before sliding it back into its holster. His expression hadn't changed, but his message was clear, he could have ended it if he wanted to. Biker's humility. Jack stood there, his hands trembling as he stared at Caleb. The arrogance and bravado that had fueled him moments before were gone, replaced by a mixture of fear and humiliation. You could have killed me, Jack muttered, his voice barely audible. But I didn't, Caleb replied evenly. Now take your men and go. Jack hesitated, his pride still warring with the reality of his situation. Finally, he nodded. Let's go, boys. The gang, subdued and silent, followed their leader as he picked up his hat and walked to his bike. They mounted their rides and roared out of town, leaving Dry Creek in peace at last. Aftermath. The townsfolk erupted in cheers as Caleb turned back toward the saloon. People crowded around him, thanking him and patting him on the back. But Caleb didn't linger in the spotlight. He simply nodded, offering a small smile before retreating to the quiet sanctuary of the Silver Spur. Inside, he poured himself a glass of whiskey and sat at the bar, staring at his reflection in the polished wood. The weight of the duel hung heavy on him, a reminder of the life he'd tried to leave behind. Thank you, Caleb, Mary Beth said softly, standing beside him. He looked up at her and nodded. Just doing what needed to be done. For the first time in years, Caleb felt a sense of belonging in Dry Creek. The town saw him not just as a bartender but as a protector, a quiet guardian who would stand for what was right. And for now, that was enough. A quiet hero's legacy. The sun set gently over Dry Creek, painting the town in hues of gold and amber. The events of the last few days still lingered in the air, a mix of tension, relief, and admiration. Inside the Silver Spur, life seemed to return to normal, but for Caleb Thornton, the quiet bartender who had once been the legendary Deadeye, life had changed in subtle but meaningful ways. Caleb's reflection. Caleb sat alone in the saloon after closing time, the lights dimmed, and the only sound was the faint creak of the wooden floor as he moved behind the bar. His revolver lay on the counter, the same weapon that had once made him infamous across the Old West. He picked it up, turning it over in his hands, the cold metal reflecting the faint light of the oil lamp. The revolver felt heavier than it used to, not because of its weight but because of what it represented. It wasn't just a tool, it was a symbol of his past, a life he had sworn to leave behind. For years, Caleb had avoided the violence that once defined him. He had traded the chaos of duels and bounty hunts for the quiet rhythm of tending bar, hoping to find peace in simplicity. But in the end, he realized that sometimes peace had to be defended, even at the cost of revisiting the person he used to be. "It's not about the gun," he murmured to himself. "It's about how you choose to use it." Town's gratitude. The next morning, Caleb opened the saloon to find a surprise waiting for him. The townsfolk had gathered outside, holding baskets of food, bottles of whiskey, and even a freshly baked pie. Hank, the old rancher who had recognized Caleb during the standoff, stepped forward. "Caleb," Hank began, his voice gruff but warm, "we owe you more than we can say. You didn't just save Mary Beth or this saloon. You reminded us what it means to stand up for what's right." Mary Beth stepped forward, holding a bouquet of wildflowers. "Thank you, Caleb. For everything." The crowd erupted in applause, and Caleb, though unused to such attention, nodded his thanks with a small, appreciative smile. As the day went on, patrons filled the saloon, each one eager to share a drink and a kind word with Caleb. The once quiet bartender found himself at the center of the town's gratitude, and though he didn't seek the limelight, he felt a warmth he hadn't known in years. Bikers change. A week later, a surprising visitor arrived in Dry Creek. Jack Iron Fist Reardon rode into town, alone this time. His leather vest was gone, replaced by a simple denim jacket, and the swagger that once marked his every step had vanished. Jack entered the Silver Spur with a nervous glance around the room. Caleb, polishing glasses behind the bar as usual, looked up with a calm expression. "Afternoon, Jack," Caleb said, his tone neutral. Jack hesitated, then stepped forward. "Look, I came to apologize." The saloon fell silent as everyone turned to watch. Jack cleared his throat and continued. "I was wrong. About you. About a lot of things. The gang's disbanded. Some of the boys have gone back to their families, trying to make things right. I'm doing the same." Caleb studied him for a long moment before nodding. "Takes courage to admit when you're wrong. I hope you stick to it." Jack nodded, his face serious. "I will. And, thanks. For not killing me when you had the chance." Caleb gave a faint smile. "You're welcome." Jack left the saloon quietly, and the townsfolk watched him go. Though they were wary of his presence, they couldn't deny the change in the man. Final scene. That evening, as the last of the patrons trickled out, Caleb stood alone behind the bar. He reached beneath the counter and pulled out his holster and revolver. For a moment, he held them in his hands, the memories of his past swirling in his mind. With deliberate care, Caleb hung the holster on the wall behind the bar, next to an old photograph of the saloon's original owner. It wasn't a display of pride or vanity, it was a reminder. A reminder of who he had been, who he had chosen to become, and the life he was committed to leading. The door creaked open, and Mary Beth peeked in. "You okay, Caleb?" He turned and nodded, a genuine smile softening his features. "Yeah. I'm good." She smiled back and stepped inside, helping him set the bar for the next day. As the night deepened, the Silver Spur was filled with the sound of laughter and clinking glasses. Caleb moved behind the bar with his usual quiet efficiency, serving drinks to a lively, grateful crowd. For the first time in years, Caleb felt truly at home. The peace he had sought for so long wasn't just in the quiet, it was in the community he had built, the people he had protected, and the legacy he was creating. The saloon door swung shut behind a new patron, and Caleb greeted them with a nod and a smile, ready to serve another drink in the town he now called his own. And above it all, hanging quietly on the wall, the holster and revolver stood as silent witnesses to the journey of a man who had once been a legend, and who now simply wanted to be at peace.